Hi everyone, I am Giselle Miralles. I'm an instructor in the Writing Support Center, and as you all may know already, the Writing Support Center is currently closed uh, because of the things going on with COVID-19. All of campus is closed, so for that reason, myself and Professor Genesis Montalvo will be conducting workshops and posting them to Canvas. So if you have a professor that would like you to, complete a workshop or would like you to get some extra help, these are here for you to do. Today's workshop's on identifying common grammar mistakes and punctuation errors. There's also a worksheet available, and to get the full experience of this workshop, please use a worksheet while you go through the workshop. It will give you a chance to process the concepts that we cover. So if you haven't downloaded that, I recommend that you download that now. You could go ahead and just pause and download it if you haven't. Other than that, I'm just going to get started. So the objective of this workshop is to help you identify common grammar mistakes you might see in your writing. Obviously, there are many grammar and punctuation concepts, but we only are going to cover the following that I'm going to talk about, just because these are the ones that we see a lot of students have trouble understanding and mastering. The few that we're covering today are run-on sentences, comma and apostrophe usage, and misplaced and dangling modifiers. After you complete this activity, you should be able to identify common grammar issues and find and correct those grammar issues in your own writing. So that's a goal for today. Like I said, there's quite a few different types of topics we're covering. So hopefully the worksheet will help you follow along while we cover them. So the first one we're going to talk about are run-on sentences. A run-on sentence is an error that occurs when two sentences are joined incorrectly. So there are actually two different kinds of run-ons, and we're going to be covering both of those. And those two are few sentences and comma splices. A few sentence, that one occurs when two sentences are incorrectly joined without any punctuation. So you can think of it as, two sentences without a coordinating conjunction or a comma. And that's why to correct a few sentence, you would use a comma and a coordinating conjunction. For those of you who don't know what a coordinating conjunction is, there's an acronym called FANBOYS. It's a way for you to remember these things. Those are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Any 6 of these words can be used to correct a fused sentence. And like I said, you would need a comma as well. But using one of those words and a comma will unfuse the sentence. So here's an example of a fused sentence. The economy has improved. Many people still do not have jobs. As you can see, when I read that, I didn't know when to stop or how to read it, essentially, because there's no punctuation there except for the period at the end. So I'm just going to give you a minute or two, however long you need. Just pause the video to actually do this on your worksheet. It's example A or question A. Just go ahead and fill in how you might correct this. And yet, like I said, go ahead and pause, and then in a minute or two, we can resume. Okay, so with the correction of this, the revised version would be the economy has improved, but many do not have jobs. So now that you see when I read it out loud, the economy has improved, but many do not have jobs. It feels more natural. It makes more sense because that comma and the but there unfuse the sentence essentially. So it's no longer a run-on sentence. Another important thing to note as well is I used the coordinating conjunction but instead of the other ones that were allowed that I could have used. So like I said, there's 6, for, and, nor, but, or, yet. So I could have used yet just because this sentence requires that you see kind of like the irony, right? The economy's improving, but many people still don't have jobs. If you use something like for and, it wouldn't make as much sense. The economy has improved and many do not have jobs. It doesn't make quite as much sense as but, because it doesn't show the irony of the situation. Even though the economy is improving, many people still don't have jobs. So you do need to show that by using inappropriate fanboys or a coordinating conjunction. So it does depend on the sentence which coordinating conjunction will work best for your purposes. But in this case, we used but. If you wrote but or yet, you would have gotten that correct. All right, so the second type of run-on sentence we're covering is comma splices. So a comma splice occurs when two sentences, independent clauses, are incorrectly joined with just a comma. For those of you who don't know what an independent clause is, it's just, it's actually a sentence. The easiest way to think about it is as a complete sentence. But an independent clause is made up of a subject and a predicate. It is considered grammatically complete. Another way to think about it, like I said, is just a complete sentence. So it's a comma splice is essentially when two complete sentences are incorrectly joined with just a comma. There are a few ways you can correct a comma splice. For example, you can use a period to separate the two. So since they're both complete sentences, technically this would work if you use a period to separate them. You can also use a semicolon. I know semicolons are something I commonly see in student writing, and they're a little confusing to use because they're not quite a colon, they're not quite a comma, they're not quite a period, but you can actually use a semicolon to separate independent clauses or two complete sentences, as long as those sentences are closely related in idea. And I'll get, once I show the examples, I'll get a little bit more into that. You can also use a coordinating conjunction to correct a comma splice, which is what we did in the last few sentence section, but you can also use a coordinating conjunction to correct a comma splice as well. So one example of a comma splice is the economy has improved. Many do not have jobs. So I'm just going to give you a second to think about how you could correct this. Again, you can use one of the three strategies I mentioned here, using a period, a semicolon, or a coordinating conjunction. But just go ahead and take a minute, go ahead and pause here so that you can correct the sentence. Okay, so now that you've corrected the sentence, one way, or there's actually three ways you can revise the sentence. The first way is to use a period, like I said. So the economy has improved, period. Many do not have jobs. This is technically correct, but for the sake of this sentence, I don't know if I would do this, just because, like I said in the previous example, you're not quite grasping the irony of the situation, the fact that the economy has improved and many do not have jobs. You kind of want to show that sort of disconnect. So while this isn't incorrect, there's a better way to write these two sentences. Something like how the economy has improved, period. However, many do not have jobs would be a better version of the sentence. Using that word however shows that irony I'm speaking of. But obviously that's a transitional phrase, and we're just talking about using a period and not how to add a transitional phrase. But transitional phrases like however or words, transitional phrases or words are a good way to connect sentences. You can also use a semicolon to correct the sentence. So the economy has improved. Many do not have jobs. So earlier when I was saying that you can use a semicolon to join two sentences that are closely related in idea, it doesn't quite work here. Like I said, grammatically it's not incorrect, but I wouldn't use it for this sentence. Perhaps if the sentence was the economy has improved, many have jobs, that would be a good usage of the semicolon because both are independent clauses, but at the same time, the ideas are closely related. Because the sentence is saying many do not have jobs, a semicolon wouldn't be the best use for this sentence. But like I said, it's not grammatically incorrect. There's just better ways to rewrite these sentences. There's also using, like I said, you can also use a coordinating conjunction, just like we did with the fused sentence. And that would be the economy has improved, comma, yet many do not have jobs. So unlike the other sentence I use the word yet, this would probably be the best revision of this sentence. And that's because you are able to show the irony of the economy improving, but people still not have, still not having jobs by using the word yet right here. So this is a good revision of this sentence. Like I said, you can use any three of these, but when you are revising, you should always keep in mind like what sounds best for my purposes, because it's not a one size fits all. You might have to try multiple things and test out multiple things for whatever your sentence might be to see what works best in that situation. But these are just 3 examples, and also 3 examples of what might work and what might not work. Okay, moving on. Also on the topic of commas, also on the topic of commas are superfluous commas. So that's a fancy way of saying too many commas. So in addition to comma splices and forgotten commas and run-on sentences, superfluous commas, that's incorrect, are, not is. Superfluous commas are another comma error you might encounter. So this one is some students lack commas. In this case, this person would have too many commas. So sometimes I feel that when we are writing or revising or editing our things, we feel the need to over punctuate just because we want to be sure that we're capturing all the commas that we need. But in this case, sometimes too many commas is just too many commas. And it just makes it difficult to read. So one example of superfluous commas is this sentence. Tutoring is recommended by most instructors, especially those that teach subjects like math, English, and social sciences. So you see when I was reading that sentences, I had very unnatural pauses while I was reading. That tends to happen when you have too many commas, because commas kind of add a natural pause when you're reading a sentence. And that's actually while it's not always correct, it is a helpful method when you are reading, is when you do feel a natural pause, that might be a good place to put a comma in. But like I said, when I read this one, I had too many pauses where it really hindered my reading of the sentence. So I'm just going to give you another minute or two, however long you need to go ahead and revise this on your worksheet. You can go ahead and pause right here. Okay, so with superfluous commas with the sentence, this is how you would revise it. So tutoring is recommended by most instructors, especially those that teach subjects like math, English, and social sciences. So this sentence is a big improvement. As you can see, we got rid of this comma and there's no comma here. So instead of tutoring is recommended by most instructors, it's tutoring is recommended by most instructors. It's much more natural when you read it. You really don't need a comma here, especially with a word like by, there's no need to add that comma. And then after, we also got rid of by most instructors. That also is an unnecessary comma. You definitely don't need that. And then we got rid of the comma here where it says that teach subjects like. There's no reason, especially because teach is attached to the word subjects, those that teach subjects. You wouldn't want to separate those two words with a comma. It doesn't make sense. And then also this comma on like is unnecessary. And I feel like I see that comma sometimes the most, just because I feel like sometimes we feel like the need to punctuate before we provide a list, but you actually do not need to do that. So whenever you create a list, just get rid of this comma. And then obviously, math, English, and social sciences, all those commas were kept. Some of you might have heard of an Oxford comma, and that's when you add the extra comma right here. While it is optional, I recommend it just because it makes your sentences clearer. Oh, I meant this comma right here, I'm sorry. So subjects like math, English, and social sciences, this comma right here is Oxford comma. I recommend it just because it makes your lists more clearly delineated. So whenever you do make a list, just make sure you're adding, say you have 3 things in your list, math, English, and social sciences, make sure you add 2 commas after the first thing in your list and after the second thing in your list. It just adds for more clarity when you do write these lists. So that's superfluous commas. Like I said, sometimes less is more, especially in terms of commas. Okay, so the next thing we're going to cover are apostrophe errors. Apostrophes indicate possession for nouns. So essentially that shows like when a noun possesses something, like for example, John's shirt, several months' work, but it's not for personal pronouns like it's, your, their, whose. Those things do not need apostrophes, so you wouldn't say your apostrophe S or their apostrophe S. You don't need to use apostrophes to indicate possession for pronouns like those, but you do need it for nouns in general. You can also use apostrophes for certain contradictions. In this case, it's is a way to use an apostrophe. It's is not showing possession. I find that sometimes students get confused with this. They think that it's with the apostrophe is showing possession. It isn't. It's a contraction of it is. So that's another way to use apostrophes. So like I said, there's generally 2 main rules for apostrophe usage, possession of nouns and contractions. However, they are generally not used to indicate plural words. I see this error a lot. It's when you're providing, so say like she ate a lot of oranges, right? That word oranges, you wouldn't have an apostrophe before the S. There's no need for that. You would just put the S at the end. So generally when you're talking about plural words, you would not use an apostrophe. Like I said, it's only possession and contractions. So in this example, in the current conflict, it's uncertain whose borders they're contesting. There's quite a few issues in this sentence. Some of them are possession issues. So just go ahead and read it. Do your best to try to revise it and take a minute or 2, and we'll come back once you fill that out on your worksheet. Okay, so the revised version of the sentence would be, in the current conflict, it is, or it's, you could use it's, it is uncertain whose borders they are contesting. So for this one, we did more correction than just the apostrophe. I'll go over the non-apostrophe error corrections first, and then we'll go over the apostrophe corrections after. So for example, in the current conflict, this is a dependent clause, which means it depends on an independent clause. You have to have both of them if you have a dependent clause, because a dependent clause cannot stand alone. That is why there is a comma here. So in the current conflict, comma, it is. So now we're going to move into the apostrophe usage. So if you look up here, they use it's with no apostrophe. So in this example, it's incorrect because this is actually the possessive form of it's. I know it's a little confusing because you use an apostrophe to show possession, but remember, an apostrophe is also used for contractions. And with it's, that's certainly true. So it is should be used as a contraction, it, apostrophe S, not without the apostrophe. So this is incorrect. Like I said, this is the possessive version. This is a correct contracted version of it is. So you would definitely use this instead. So it is uncertain whose. So here's another correction. So pronouns are a little confusing because obviously the writer here thought they were showing possession by using apostrophe S, but actually for whose, this is a possessive, W-H-O-S-E. So this is a possessive for whose. Like who, so whose is an irregular irregular pronoun in terms of how to show possession. You would not use this. You would use this to show possession. So it is uncertain whose borders they are. So this writer up here used the incorrect form of their. You're actually not supposed, this shows possession. So T-H-E-I-R is a possessive pronoun. There with an apostrophe R-E, that's actually a contracted form of they are. So in this sentence, they're not trying to show possession of contesting, they're just trying to contract they are. So this would be the correct form of their. So that's why you could either use they are or their. It's up to you as to how, which version of the words you would like to use, either the contracted version or the non-contracted version. So altogether, it reads, in the current conflict, it is uncertain whose borders they're contesting. So this would be the correct version. Obviously, this one reads pretty similarly, but there's a lot of punctuation errors in terms of using the possessive and not using the possessive pronouns. Okay, so for this example, the Aztecs' rituals of renewal increased in frequency over the course of time. So this sentence is a little bit more simple. Go ahead and give yourself a minute or two to fill this out on your worksheet, and then when you're done, we'll review a correct revised version of this sentence. Okay, so with this sentence, the correct revised version would be, the Aztecs' rituals of renewal increased in frequency over the course of time. So reads exactly the same, but there are two differences in this sentence that you should have caught. So the Aztecs, this is correct, right? So, or I'm sorry, I said there was two errors. There's only one error. One thing I wanted to point out, though, is that the Aztecs, the apostrophe is after the S, not before the S, right? It wouldn't be the Aztec apostrophe S, because when you're talking about multiple things, you put the S, or you put the apostrophe after the S. So it would be Aztecs as written, not Aztec apostrophe S. So just remember that with plural words that have an S at the end, you always put the comma at the end, or I'm sorry, the apostrophe at the end. So the apostrophe always goes after the S for plural words. So the Aztecs rituals, one error this person made here is that they put an apostrophe S on rituals. This actually does not need to show possession. You're not showing possession of renewal increased. You're actually just talking about the plural of rituals. So it should be plural rituals, not possessive rituals. So that's why the Aztecs, possessive rituals, non-possessive, of renewal increased in frequency over the course of time. So just remember, you never use apostrophe S to show plural. Apostrophe should only be used when talking about possession, and also when contracting. Those are the only two times you will use apostrophes. There's really no other need to use them outside of that. Okay, So the next thing we're going to cover are misplaced and dangling modifiers. Uh, this happens when modifiers are not placed near words they describe, or if the modified word is not actually in the sentence at all. So this one's a little bit more of it's not as obvious, I want to say, as like, comma splices or run-on sentences, but it is a very important thing, especially if you want to be a clear writer. When you do look for misplaced and dangling modifiers, it's important to know what a modifier actually is if you want to understand how to find them. So that's why I put this definition right here. Modifier changes, clarifies, qualifies, or limits a particular word in a sentence in order to add emphasis, explanation, or detail. Modifiers tend to be descriptive words such as adjectives and adverbs. So a modifier can be an adjective and an adverb, but it does not mean an adjective. It does not mean that things outside of adjective and adverbs can modify a word. So in this case, in the sentence below, they're actually using adjective and adverbs to modify. First, let's talk about the sentence with no modifiers. Sarah was a sure fit for junior prom queen. So in this case, let's think of Sarah as a word to be modified, right? In the sentence with modifier, Sarah, pretty, and brunette was a sure fit as junior prom queen. So pretty and brunette are both adjectives, but they're also modifiers. The reason why they're modifiers is because they're modifying the word Sarah. The cool thing about modifiers is that it can expand your writing more. So in the sentence above, Sarah was a sure fit. Like, I don't know anything about Sarah. I don't know how she is. I don't know what she looks like. Whereas below, I get a little bit more about her, pretty and brunette. I mean, that doesn't tell me a whole lot more, but I at least know she's brunette and she's pretty, right? So that's the cool thing about modifiers, is that you can modify certain words in your sentence to show more descriptive details about them. So you can actually really improve your writing if you use appropriately placed modifiers. So a misplaced modifier can cause confusion okay, wait, let me go back. So like I said, we're talking about misplaced and dangling modifiers. The first one we're going to talk about is a misplaced modifier. Misplaced modifiers can cause confusion or intentional humor in a sentence when they are placed too far from the noun they are modifying. So one key thing about using modifiers is that they should be placed close to the word they're changing. If you don't place them close to the word that they're changing, the sentence just becomes confusing, and sometimes it can be funny. So in the example below, my parents bought a car for my sister they call Pumpkin. So in this case, I don't know who the writer is talking about being called Pumpkin. Are they talking about the car? Or are they talking about the sister? It's unclear. Especially because the way it's worded, my parents bought a car for my sister they call Pumpkin. It doesn't quite sound like it's modifying the word sister just because of how it's worded. It sounds like it could be car, but again, it's unclear because it wasn't placed correctly. If you were to rewrite this sentence, something like, they bought a car they call Pumpkin for my sister. So the writer here changed my parents to they, but what they ended up saying was, or rewriting it as, was they bought a car they call Pumpkin for my sister. So now, because this phrase they call Pumpkin is closer to a car, I know now that they are actually talking about the car being called Pumpkin, not the sister of this person, right? So it's clearer now. Now I know that the parents are calling the car Pumpkin, not the sister. Versus in the sentence above, I was unsure. So that's the key with modifiers, is you really need to make sure you're placing them close to what they are modifying. If you don't place it close to the word that they are modifying, it can be confusing for your reader. So for dangling modifiers, this one's a little bit different in that the modified word or phrase is not in the sentence at all. So this means you have a modifier in your sentence, but you didn't actually write the actual word it's modifying into the sentence. So for example, when writing an essay, comma, the prompt is read for direction. The issue with this sentence is I'm not quite sure who is reading the prompt. There's no subject to tell me who is performing this action. I'm unsure. So in this case, there's no the word that is being modified or the phrase being modified is not present in the sentence, which leaves it unclear for the reader as to what is actually being modified. So just take a just take a second to rewrite the sentence. And once you're done, we can go ahead and review that revision. So go ahead and pause right here. Okay, so the revised version will say, when writing an essay, the student reads the prompt for direction. So here is a modified word, student, right? So the student is the one doing the reading of the prompt for direction. When it's not present, it's unclear as to who is doing the action. So it's really important that you include whatever you're modifying into the sentence. Otherwise, your reader's unsure. Like I said, just like the misplaced modifier, it just makes it more confusing for your reader. So just making sure your subject or modified word is present will help keep your reader from being confused. Okay, so after reviewing all of these different grammar and punctuation errors, I know it's a lot, and I know it's hard to really grasp these concepts, right away from just a short presentation. But I wanted to give you some more strategies for helping you find these grammar and punctuation errors. The first one is just to reread your work. I think a lot of the times when you read your work, when you like say you're typing up an essay, it's due the next day, and then you don't have time to reread your work, I think that's when a lot of the typos happen, right? So I think it's really important that you actually go ahead and reread that. You should always leave time after you finish writing to reread your work. A lot of the time, these errors are easy to catch if you just read them. Or find them by rereading. It's also a good idea to read it out loud. When you read your work out loud, you're able to hear more often the errors that might be happening in your writing. As you saw earlier when I was reading through the commas, the superfluous commas sentences, or the superfluous comma sentence, there was a lot of pauses in my reading because every time I read a comma, I usually pause. So if you're rereading your work, you're more likely to catch these things, especially if you're reading them out loud. So that's tip number one to help you from making these grammar and punctuation errors, or at least finding them. Number two is just to step away from your work. I think sometimes when we spend too long on the same thing for long stretches of time, we start losing sight of the errors that we may be making. So that's why it's really important for you to just step away and take a break from it. That way, when you come back, you have a fresh pair of eyes to look over it. This is kind of like when you have like a friend or a teacher or a tutor read over your work, and they find things that you could have found, but because you spent so much time on it, you're not seeing them any longer. So that's why if you just step away, maybe put it away for a day or two, you might be able to find these errors more easily when you revisit your work. Number three, use resources like Grammarly to help find your errors. So I know that Microsoft Word has, and Google Docs, they both have built-in spelling and grammar checkers. The thing about those two word processing programs is that they're, while their spell check is usually pretty good, their grammar check is not. I would recommend to always take their grammar recommendations with a grain of salt, because sometimes it's just not smart enough to know what you're trying to do. So I would recommend not using those as heavily. Resources like Grammarly, which is a website, are more helpful because they help you identify those issues and they tell you what issue is occurring, versus in Microsoft Word or Google Docs. It's not telling you exactly what's happening, versus Grammarly will help you more so with that. So, you know, once you've reread your work, stepped away from it, submitting it to a website like Grammarly might help you find more of the errors that you're not catching yourself. Another thing is to recheck the most important sections. So I think when you have a punctuation or grammar issue in, say, your thesis statement, or in your the first sentence of each of your body paragraphs, I think that is more of an issue than, say, in the middle of, you know, your third paragraph, you have a comma splice, right? Versus if your thesis statement has a comma splice, it kind of affects credibility. So that's why it's important to at least recheck the most important sections to make sure you're not making those punctuation or grammar mistakes in those sections. Like I said, you can also, another thing you can also do is use things like this workshop to help you catch those different grammar mistakes by helping you like identify them more easily. But another thing you can also do is to use references and resources that will help you acquaint yourself more with the different grammar and punctuation errors. I've listed a few here. You can go ahead and type these links in. I actually used this University of Minnesota Center for Writing, some of their materials in my own presentation. They offer a lot of different examples of common grammar issues, grammar and punctuation issues. If you look at it, you might find some that you have trouble with. Also, the Grammarly blog, which is the same website that you can use to submit your paper for grammar checks, is another way that you can check your modified, or I'm sorry, this is actually where I got the modifiers material from, but the blog itself is very helpful for different grammar issues, and they explain it in really accessible ways. So if you like a more like fun and interesting way to learn about grammar topics, Grammarly is also a good place for that. One resource we always recommend in our center is the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill's Writing Center. They have many different resources available on their website, not just on grammar, just general, you know, body paragraph information, introductions, thesis, anything in the writing process, they'll have it. It's a really helpful tool for you for grammar, punctuation, and more. So I would recommend you visiting that website if you do need extra help. So yeah, that's pretty much everything. One last thing I'd like to ask you to do is there's a question number 2 at the end. After reviewing the different type or different ways that you can catch your own grammar mistakes or punctuation errors, what are some ways that you actually some ways that you try to find your grammar and punctuation issues? If you can, just fill out number 2. It's just a sort of reflection to help you think about your own process. Just go ahead and fill that out. If you are getting extra credit from an instructor for doing a workshop, I think turning in the worksheet would be one way that you can claim that extra credit. You can also have them email myself, Giselle, or Genesis, and we can also see if there's another way that we might be able to give you that credit. But for now, I would really recommend just using the worksheet if you are getting extra credit. And like I said, the worksheet is just a helpful way for you to process, especially throughout this workshop. But anyways, I hope you found this helpful. If you have any other questions, we will be having more workshops, so you'll be able to review those and hopefully get the help you need. And then additionally, just as a reminder, feel free to use our tutoring services, which you can access at the Writing Support Center PCC website. Thank you.